In late November of 1944, 38 German women stood inside a prisoner of war mess hall on the Oklahoma plains and stared at a dessert they had been taught should not exist. Pumpkin pie, not bread made with sawdust, not boiled turnips, not black coffee stretched with chicory until it tasted like dirt. A real slice of pumpkin pie, golden crust, cinnamon, a white curl of cream melting on top. And when 23-year-old Clara Vogel took the first bite, she began to cry so hard that the American guard across from her forgot he was supposed to hate her. That was the part nobody in the barracks knew how to explain. Because Clara had not been captured as a civilian. She had worn a German uniform. She had sent coded messages for an army that had helped burn Europe alive. She had sat through lectures in Cologne, where instructors warned her that Americans were soft in peace and savage in war. They had told her capture would mean hunger, shame, maybe worse. But now an American mess sergeant was walking down the row with a pan of pie, like she was feeding guests at her own table. And Clara could feel one terrible thought opening inside her. If they lied about this, what else had they lied about? The camp was not much to look at: a double fence, guard towers, dusty roads. Low wooden buildings thrown together by the War Department when captured enemy soldiers began arriving in numbers nobody had prepared for. This particular annex sat behind a former training compound outside Muskogee, Oklahoma, where winter came flat and dry, with prairie grass scraping against the wire. Most of the prisoners were men, but in the last week of November, a separate barracks had been opened for 38 German female auxiliaries captured during the Allied push through France and Belgium. They were not frontline infantry. They were radio operators, office clerks, medical aides, telephone switchboard workers, and military drivers. Women useful to the German war machine because they could keep messages moving while the men kept fighting. The youngest was 18. The oldest was 32. They arrived exhausted, thin, and suspicious enough to flinch at kindness. Clara Vogel was the one the others watched. She came from Cologne. She had worked in a signals office where every word had to be exact and every emotion had to be swallowed. Her dark hair was pinned tightly under a faded field cap. Her uniform jacket had been brushed so often the cloth shone at the elbows. Clara had made a private rule for herself the day she was captured: stand straight, speak little, trust nothing. Beside her stood Marta Klein, a former surgical aide from Bremen with hollow cheeks and hands that still moved like a nurse's hands, even when she was only holding a tin cup. Near them was Ilse Bauer, 19, from Augsburg, who had never seen an American before surrendering to one. And at the end of the line stood Lise Brandt, older than most of them, a clerk from Dresden who had repeated party slogans for so long that she no longer knew which ones she believed. On that Thursday morning, Major Robert Halden stood at the front of the mess hall with Captain Ruth Mercer of the Women's Army Corps at his side. The major was a square-shouldered man with silver at his temples and a face that looked carved by weather. Captain Mercer had been brought in because the army did not quite know what to do with captured women, and somebody in command had decided that a female officer might keep the situation from becoming a scandal. A corporal translated the major's words into German. "Today is Thanksgiving," he said. "In this country, families sit down together and give thanks for what remains." Clara heard the words, but did not move. The major continued, "You are prisoners, that is true, but you are also human beings far from home. Today you will eat the same meal as the rest of this camp." A few of the German women looked at one another. Same meal? That sounded like a trick. They had heard about American propaganda. They had been warned that the enemy smiled before he humiliated you. Clara tightened her jaw and waited for the trap. Then the kitchen door opened. The first smell was roasted turkey. The second was butter, real butter. It hit the room with such force that one of the younger women whispered a prayer before she could stop herself. Mess Sergeant Ruthie Coyle came out carrying a platter almost too heavy for her arms. Behind her, 2 cooks brought mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, rolls, cranberry sauce, and a pan of stuffing rich with sage. The German women remained standing. No one knew whether sitting too soon would be punished. Captain Mercer stepped forward and spoke in careful German. "Please, sit down. Eat slowly. Eat slowly." That was the sentence that made Marta Klein glance down at her own hands. Because nobody said that to starving people, unless there was enough food to be dangerous. The women sat. Tin forks scraped against plates. At first they took cautious bites small enough to preserve pride. Then hunger took over. The turkey was tender. The potatoes were soft and heavy with butter. The rolls tore open in clouds of steam. Ilse Bauer held a piece of bread in both hands and stared at it like it was evidence from another planet. For months, she had eaten whatever could be stretched. Cabbage, beet pulp, rye cut with meal so dark it stained the mouth. In her family's apartment, they had saved grease in a chipped cup and used it until it smelled rancid. Now she was being offered seconds. Seconds. Across the table, Private Samuel Keene tried not to stare. Sam was 21, from a farm outside Davenport, Iowa. He had been trained to guard prisoners, not interpret their silence. He had expected arrogance, defiance, maybe insults. He had not expected women in enemy uniforms to hold dinner rolls like holy objects. When Sergeant Coyle came out again, she was carrying dessert. The pan was ordinary, dented at one corner. The crust was imperfect. One edge had browned too fast. But to the women in that room it looked impossible. Pumpkin pie. Sergeant Coyle set one slice in front of each prisoner. "Go on," she said gently, though most of them could not understand her words. "It's Thanksgiving." Clara looked down. The orange filling was smooth, spiced, and bright against the plain tin plate. A small spoonful of cream had been placed on top, not much. Just enough to say someone had thought about pleasure, not survival. Her fork trembled. She hated that it trembled. She cut the smallest corner and put it in her mouth. The taste came softly. Sugar first, then cinnamon, then the warm earthiness of pumpkin, then cream, and behind the taste came memory. Not one memory, 100. Cologne in the winter of 1943. Her mother standing in a bread queue before sunrise. Boots wrapped in newspaper because the soles had split. A baker apologizing because the flour had been cut again. Her father pretending his soup was enough so Clara's younger brother could have 2 potatoes instead of 1. The pie dissolved on her tongue, and Clara understood something before she had words for it. This was not just dessert. This was proof. Proof that somewhere beyond the speeches, beyond the flags, beyond the maps pinned on office walls, another nation could feed its soldiers, guard its prisoners, and still have sugar left for its enemies. Her throat closed. She tried to swallow the sob before anyone saw it. She failed. Marta turned toward her, then turned away, because she was crying too. Marta was back in Bremen, in a hospital corridor after an air raid, washing bandages in cold water because there were no clean ones left. She remembered a boy whose wound should not have killed him, but he had not eaten properly in weeks. She remembered the nurses boiling linen and pretending it was enough. Ilse Bauer covered her mouth with both hands. She remembered asking her mother what oranges tasted like, and watching her mother lie badly. Liesbrandt did not cry at first. She stared at her pie as if it had betrayed her. Lies had typed requisition reports. She had seen the columns: coal shortages, transport shortages, civilian ration reductions, workers fainting before noon. Every number had said the same thing. Germany was not marching toward abundance. Germany was consuming itself. But she had kept typing. She had told herself sacrifice proved loyalty. Now an American cook had placed cinnamon in front of her. Cinnamon. The room began to change, not loudly, not all at once, but the old lines blurred. Enemies did not offer second helpings. Enemies did not warn you to eat slowly so you would not get sick. Enemies did not put whipped cream on a prisoner's plate. Private Sam Keene saw Clara trying to wipe her face with the sleeve of her uniform. He looked toward Captain Mercer. The captain gave one small nod. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief his mother had mailed him from Iowa. He slid it across the table. Clara looked at it, then at him. Her eyes were red and furious with confusion. In her training, Americans were described as animals with engines, money, and no soul. In the magazines, they were grinning conquerors. In the lectures, they were barbarians waiting for their chance. But the boy across from her had dirt under his fingernails, a worried face, and a handkerchief with the letter K stitched in one corner. "It's all right," he said. He knew she probably did not understand. Still, he said it again. "You're all right." Clara took the cloth as if it might vanish. Then she pressed it against her eyes. Major Halden watched from near the kitchen door. He had ordered the dinner because regulations allowed it, because the camp had enough, and because he believed discipline did not require cruelty. But he had not expected this. He had not expected Pye to do what interrogation could not. Captain Mercer understood before he did. She saw it in the women's faces. The meal was not softening them, it was splitting something open. Not loyalty exactly. Not yet. Certainty. That night the barracks did not sleep. The women lay on narrow cots while the Oklahoma cold slipped through the boards. Some whispered. Some cried into blankets. Some stared upward as if the ceiling held an answer. Ilse spoke first from the dark. "My father said Americans would spit on us." No one answered. He said they hated all Germans. Marta's voice came from the next cot. "Maybe they do hate what Germany has done. That is different." The room went quiet. Clara turned on her side. She could still taste cinnamon. Lise Brandt sat up sharply. "Stop talking like this," she said. "You sound like children." But even her anger sounded tired. Clara answered without raising her voice. "No, we should talk. You want to confess gratitude to the enemy? I want to understand why the enemy fed us better than our own commanders fed our families." That line moved through the barracks like a match touched to paper. Marta sat up. "In Bremen, they told us hunger was temporary. They told us victory would repay everything." Ilse whispered, "But America is fighting too." Nobody needed her to finish. America was fighting across oceans. America was rationing, America was burying sons, and still there had been turkey, still there had been pie. Lisa's face hardened in the dark. "Food does not make them righteous." "No," Clara said. Then she paused. "But lies make us dangerous." That was the sentence none of them wanted, because once spoken, it could not be returned. The next days were ordinary on paper: roll call, work details, laundry, medical inspection, censored letters, lights out. But inside the routine, tiny changes began. Sam Keene was assigned to supervise a work detail near the camp garden, where the women were turning soil and clearing dead vines from the victory plots. He saw Clara struggling with a shovel whose handle had cracked. Without thinking, he showed her how to set her boot lower on the blade and use her weight instead of her arms. She watched him, then copied the movement perfectly. After several minutes, she pointed at the ground and said, in careful English, "Oklahoma, bad soil." Sam almost smiled. "No, ma'am, just stubborn." Clara repeated the word. "Stubborn," he nodded. "Like some people." For 1 second, her face did not know whether to be offended. Then she laughed. It was small. A short breath more than a sound. But it frightened her, because laughing with a guard felt like crossing a border that no map showed. That evening she scrubbed her hands in the washroom until her knuckles reddened. She could not rinse away the guilt. Captain Mercer found her sitting alone on the back step of the barracks, looking toward the fence. "May I sit?" Mercer asked in German. Clara nodded. For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Clara said, "I am becoming unrecognizable to myself." Mercer waited. "I wore the uniform. I did the work. I believed discipline meant not questioning. Now I am a prisoner, and I am warm. I am fed. I am treated with more care than I saw in some German offices." Her voice tightened. "What does that make me?" Captain Mercer looked across the compound. Alive, Clara gave a bitter little smile. That is not an answer. It is the first one. Clara looked down at her hands. If I go home and say the Americans were kind, they will call me corrupted. Some might. If I say nothing, I remain a liar. Mercer turned to her. Then write down what is true. You do not have to know yet what it means. That advice became dangerous, because truth, once written, becomes harder to betray. A week after Thanksgiving, Red Cross stationery arrived. Each woman was permitted a short message. 25 words after censorship. No military details. No complaints designed to inflame. No politics. The recreation room filled with women staring at blank paper. Marta wrote, I am alive. I am receiving medical care. Do not worry. Then crossed out medical care. Would her mother think she was wounded? Would German censors think she was praising the enemy? Ilse wrote, the Americans are not, then stopped. Not what? Not monsters? Not starving them? Not what her father said. She tore the sheet in half. Lise sat the longest. Finally she wrote only 5 words. Mother, I am still here. Then she folded the paper before she could weaken. Clara did not write to Cologne that day. She kept seeing the pie, not as food now, but as a door. If she stepped through it, she could not carry every old belief with her. December came cold. The camp settled into a strange peace no one trusted enough to name. Marta began helping in the infirmary after the medical officer, Dr. Aaron Bell, discovered her training was real. At first he let her count gauze and sterilize instruments. Then one afternoon, an American private slipped on frozen steps and twisted his ankle badly. Marta moved before anyone ordered her to. She elevated the foot, checked the swelling, wrapped the joint with practiced pressure, and looked to Dr. Bell for permission. The injured soldier stared at her uniform. Dr. Bell said, let her work. Miss Klein knows what she's doing. Miss Klein. Not prisoner, not Kraut, not enemy, Miss Klein. Marta kept her face still until she reached the supply room. Then she cried into a stack of clean towels. Ilse found her place in the kitchen. Sergeant Coyle noticed the girl, watching every motion with desperate attention. So she taught her how to make biscuits by touch, how to measure shortening without wasting it, how to know when a crust was ready by the smell at the edge of the pan. Ilse confessed one morning that she had forgotten what real cooking looked like. In my home, she said slowly, we cooked hunger, not food. Sergeant Coyle stopped kneading dough. Then she pushed a bowl toward Ilse. Then learn this. By Christmas, the German women had hung paper stars in the barracks windows. Captain Mercer found them scraps of colored paper. Major Halden allowed them to sing carols after evening roll call. The songs floated through the cold yard, and several American guards stood outside pretending not to listen. On Christmas Day, the mess hall tables were set again. Ham this time, sweet potatoes, rolls, apple pie, pecan pie. And because Sergeant Coyle understood more than she admitted, one pumpkin pie in the center of every table. Not as a shock now, as a question. What kind of people would these women become when the war ended? Major Halden made the announcement after dinner. The War Department is preparing for eventual repatriation. Nothing is immediate, but every prisoner here should expect, when authorized, to return to Europe. The translation finished. No one cheered. That was what surprised the Americans. The Germans had talked for years about home, Heimat, mother, father, the street before bombing, the church bell, the smell of a kitchen that still had flour. But now, home had become a place full of questions. Would their families still be alive? Would their cities still stand? Would anyone believe them? Would they be punished for what kindness had done to their minds? That night, Lee spoke to Clara in the barracks. You were right, she said. Clara turned. Lise looked older than 32. If they lied about the Americans, they lied about more. Clara did not answer quickly, because the line should have felt like victory. It did not. It felt like standing at the edge of ruins and realizing the ruins were inside you too. In the spring of 1945, news came in pieces. The Rhine crossed, cities fallen, Hitler dead, Germany surrendered. Some of the women wept with relief, some with grief, some with nothing left to spend. The camp did not become a celebration. It became a waiting room, a place where defeated people learned that defeat could strip away illusion faster than any sermon. The repatriations began later, tangled in paperwork, transport, sponsorship, and post-war screening. Most of the women eventually returned to Europe. Marta went back first. She found Bremen broken, but not dead. Within 5 years, she was working in a hospital again, this time under occupation authorities who needed trained hands more than clean pasts. Ilse did not return immediately. A church family in Tulsa sponsored temporary work for her. She eventually married a mechanic who had never been overseas and spent her life teaching German to high school students who could not imagine being afraid of a Thanksgiving table. Lise returned to Dresden and wrote Clara exactly once. The letter was thin, careful, and censored by habit even when no censor remained. It said, "I am learning to live without slogans." Clara kept that sentence for the rest of her life. As for Clara, she did go back to Germany. She found the street in Cologne. She found the building gone. She found no trace of her father, and only a neighbor who remembered seeing her mother taken to a shelter during one of the raids. For 9 months, Clara lived among bricks, ash, and unanswered names. Then a letter arrived from Iowa. Private Samuel Keene was no longer a private. He was back on his family's farm, trying to remember how to be a son instead of a guard. He wrote simply, "I still have the handkerchief if you want to return it." Clara laughed when she read it. Then she cried. It took 3 years, more papers than either of them understood, and 2 families learning to forgive what history had made difficult. But in 1949, Clara Vogel crossed the Atlantic again, not as a prisoner. This time, she arrived in America holding a suitcase, a Lutheran sponsor letter, and the handkerchief with the letter K stitched in the corner. 17 years later, in 1966, Clara Keene stood in a farmhouse kitchen outside Davenport, Iowa, rolling pie dough on a flour-dusted counter. Her daughter was 11, her son was 8. Both were arguing in the yard over who got to jump into the leaf pile first. Sam came through the back door carrying firewood and kissed the top of Clara's head like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. On the counter sat a bowl of pumpkin filling, cinnamon, nutmeg, evaporated milk, sugar measured by the cup, not by the pinch. Clara's daughter climbed onto a chair and asked, "Mama, why do you always make pumpkin pie first?" Clara stopped rolling. For years she had given the easy answer. Because it is your father's favorite. Because Thanksgiving needs it. Because the recipe works. But that morning she looked at her children, who had never seen a ration card, never boiled turnips for dinner, never been taught to hate a stranger before meeting him. And she told them the harder truth. She told them about a mess hall in Oklahoma. About women in gray uniforms standing too straight because pride was the last thing hunger had not taken. About an American sergeant who served dessert to prisoners. About a young guard who slid a handkerchief across a table. About the first bite of pie and the shame of realizing mercy could come from the side she had been ordered to fear. Her children listened without blinking. At the end her son asked, "Did the pie make you American?" Clara smiled. "No, the pie made me honest." She set the crust into the pan. Outside, Sam called for the children. Clara poured the filling slowly, watching it settle into place. For 22 years she had carried that first slice inside her. Not as sweetness, not as nostalgia, as evidence. A government had given her slogans. A war had given her hunger. A prison camp had given her a table. And at that table, one slice of pumpkin pie had not ended the war for Clara Vogel. It had ended the lie.